Thank you all so much. As I explained, this is our sort of preliminary effort out of the box to capture the story of the round one filing that really kicked off the cellular revolution. And all of you all played a role in that. And since the story begins at the FCC, long ago and far away in 1968, I'm going to let the very young Morgan O'Brien give us a little background of 18261 and 18262.
Still in my 20s, I might add. I joined the FCC in 1970 in what was called the Mobile Services Division of the Common Carrier Bureau. And I got the job when the head of recruitment for the FCC said, "We don't have any jobs. We're sure you don't want this one." And I said, "Well, this isn't going to be my last job, this will be my first job, so it's fine. Mobile Services Division, I'll take it." Yeah. An engineer there said, "You might be interested in this proceeding," and he gave me this big pack of stuff, dockets 18261 and 18262. These were two proceedings in which the FCC was reallocating the upper portion of the TV UHF band for use in mobile services, different types of uses. 18262 was the origin document for cellular. Yeah. But that, when I first saw it, it was already several years old. I first saw it in 1970. Yeah. The first licenses didn't actually get issued until 1982. Yeah. So there was a very contentious, protracted rulemaking to determine exactly what is this new service going to be, how's it going to work, who's going to be eligible to be applied for it, et cetera, et cetera.
And that was the proceeding that clawed back, for lack of a better term, the TV channels 70 to 83.
That is correct.
Okay.
The UHF channels. UHF. So we used to say to people, you try to go up into those bands on your TV set and you get nothing. Yeah. That's because that spectrum has now been reallocated for mobile.
All right. And Tom Gutierrez, you then were arrived at the FCC just in time to see this puppy home.
That is correct. And I would tell you that the key term at that time was underestimation. Everyone at the staff underestimated what cellular would be. I got picked out as a staff attorney in mobile service. I never rose to Morgan's great heights. And when the boss man came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to work on a new service? It's supposed to be pretty big and it's called cellular." I said, "Sure, happy to, Sheldon." He said, "That's great because everybody else I've asked said no." They didn't want to deal with it. So that was my introduction to it. And I stayed with it from 80 to 82 until we got the final rules out. And we had the first round of applications were in the box before I left the commission. I would tell you that one of the most interesting things that they did at the commission was decide how they're going to establish markets. And we started with a proposition, and I won't be too long-winded.
That's okay, no.
We started with the proposition that in mobile, we have daisy chains where one party kind of overlaps a little bit of another and another and another, and it causes hearings to be very cumbersome. So we started with the idea that we don't want that. So we were headed towards fixed markets. We eventually ended up with SMSAs that later were renamed MSAs. And in doing it, what we did was we said, we want easily recognizable areas so people don't have to wonder whether they have it defined properly or not. Then we said we want those to have a reasonable size. Mm-hmm. And then we said, and we don't want to create our own markets because we might mess it up. So Rand McNally had come along way before us, and they had established these SMSAs, and we just stole them. And at one point, we actually had a dispute over whether we the commission, owed them royalties for having used their market brand. So that's how we got started.
Yeah. And you also required, as you said, the process changed from the old daisy chain to defined markets. But you required the applicants to file their direct cases that would be used in a comparative hearing along with the applications, which was fairly unusual.
I would say it was unusual.
Unique.
It was unique, but we had a little bit of foresight there. We knew that if we gave the outsiders, like us, more time, they would use it. And there was pressure to get something started sooner rather than later. So one of the ways we saved time was having direct cases filed with the applications themselves. Even then, I would tell you, we had no idea that the applications would be as cumbersome as they were, as fulsome as they were.
Fulsome.
Yes. And I'm going to let other people talk in a second here, but there was a gentleman, Morgan, you may or may not know him, who presented an application that won the Brontosaurus Award that we in the staff designated would go to the biggest.
Was this the one that was in 2 languages?
No, that was mine.
I know.
That won another award.
Oh, right.
Well, no, this was the Brontosaurus one was for the multilingual Miami application.
That was good.
That was,
Yeah,
see,
was
I
it?
knew that.
okay.
I knew that.
I thought our award was called something else, like creativity.
No, Brontosaurus. So that
Yeah.
was it. And I'll tell you one other thing before I hand the floor over. One of the issues that the staff understood, the whole commission understood, and who were involved was, we had 2 licenses, and I think Raj can talk a little bit about how we got the 2 licenses, but we knew that if you let one of them get licensed way before another, you would have a problem. All the big spenders, all the hungry people are going to go and get committed, and the second one is going to come up and not have much to work with. Head Start doctrine is the name of that concept. And we went back and forth, do we license everybody at the same time? And the answer, in a given market, the answer was no, because that's going to be delay. So we dropped a footnote in that first order. And I used to remember the number of it, but I won't now. And it said, if you see an issue here, you can petition us and we'll give you special relief. Well, those who requested special relief were for whatever, because it wasn't forthcoming, but it played well with the DC circuit, and that's why we had it there. And then we were off and running.
Off and running. And I know, Jay, you were one of the radio common carriers that filed in multiple markets. And Morgan, you prepared a lot of those applications. And Neera and Raj were doing all the magic behind it to make that happen. But Raj, Tom mentioned that you knew why they ended up picking 2 carriers per market.
Well, so that whole thing, why it took so long with the original order coming out and then almost final licenses were granted 13, 14 years later, was that FCC, in its infinite wisdom, decided that clearly only people who have the know-how is AT&T, okay, and maybe some other local carrier like GT, that there will only be 1 license. So these guys who didn't have a name before, which was probably recently granted, maybe you guys know radio common carriers. They used to call them miscellaneous common carriers. Okay, so they said these old guys by that time was a major force because they were in paging and SMR, and Morgan knows well about all that. So they were a major force, and they had actually a lot of political clout. So they fought it all the way to the end and saying, look, there need to be 1 license for us too. That's how it was decided eventually going to be there 2 licenses, 1 for the AT&T and local exchange carriers, and the second one for radio common carriers, all these miscellaneous people. And that was the second license was decided by 1 vote at the FCC out of the 5 commissioners. Until very last minute, nobody knew whether it's going to go one way or the other. And that's how we ended up with 2 licenses. Now, that all predates me because I was at that time doing my PhD in radio spectrum. And I arrived to the scene, Neera and we arrived to the scene after the first round of licenses were granted.
No, they were filed.
They were filed.
They were not granted.
No, not granted. I'm sorry, they were filed. But all these guys were competing at each other and trying to kill each other. That's when we showed up and we said, well, we are not the fighting guys, but we do have some weapons.
And Jay, you were one of those miscellaneous carriers, big in the paging industry, looking for licenses in the major markets.
Yeah, adding to Raj's point, let's not forget the efforts of Telelocator. Telelocator was the entity for non-wireline, or what we call the paging carriers. And we made a case at the FCC and also at the Congress that AT&T's position that they have the monopoly for telephone, it does not carry to cellular, because telecarrier companies or RCCs, radio common carriers, we were also providing mobile telephone service that time. But although we had not too much spectrum, but we were in the mobile telephone business at that point. Actually, I remember I was the head of the regulatory committee at Telecater, and I took a group of us to the Senate Telecom Committee Chairman, Trent Lott, who was from my home state, Mississippi, to go talk to him. And the funny thing happened, as I walked into the room, the person sitting out, the assistant to Trent Lott, was the daughter of John Palmer.
Oh, that's handy. Yes.
She came running in and hugged me, and everybody, look what's going on here.
John Palmer was the CEO of Mobile Communications. Yes. Yes.
And I'll also, add to Tommy's comment on the underestimate. All marketing studies which were done, they were all underestimated. Example, we were the licensee of Houston, and we had engaged ADL to do the market projection. What they projected, ADL had projected for 5 years, we actually achieved in 1 year.
Yeah.
They were totally underestimated.
Yeah.
The highest I could ever get a marketing group and a client to go for was 3% penetration of the population. 3%. 3%. And I said, once this thing gets off, it's going to be every man, woman, child, and dog, which I didn't realize that it would later turn out to be true. There was such a misunderstanding, particularly once the mobile phone morphed to the portable.
Oh, yeah.
See, the trouble is this was being viewed as if it were mobile telephones, car phones.
Yeah.
And you could argue that, well, car phones may have a relatively limited applicability.
Yeah.
But by then we were beginning to see, Motorola was beginning to show its very sexy portable telephone, after which all bets are off.
5-pound portable.
It was very large. It was very large,
Yeah.
but once you got portability,
Yeah.
it was a totally different game.
It was so underestimated that when we were doing the comparative hearing, we said if we could achieve 2%, we will be in business.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. And Neera, you and Raj were in the comparative hearing process when Jay and the other RCCs were really competing against each other, because the telephone companies pretty much got their set aside. So it was really the battle among the RCCs for these licenses. And you all were doing the engineering analysis for which systems would perform most effectively, or?
Yes, we were doing all the comparative analysis. And then at that time, we had to figure out, because the FCC mandate was the largest area and the largest population. So we were trying all ways to say, okay, even though you cover the largest area, but this area cannot be counted for because this area has interference. We were doing all kind of analysis between Erlang B and Erlang C. And taking account for
I never met Erlang, did you? I never had a chance to meet her.
Frequency planning and demographic analysis.
Yeah, so I mean, really what happened when Neera and I came to town, I mean, it was like people were doing hand calculations, like Jay Baggett in the middle of the night, 11 o'clock, calculating some carry contours with hand, and then drawing them and putting this. And Neera said, why are we doing this? You can do it for 1 or 2 cells for an SMR or in paging tower. But if you're going to do it for hundreds of cells, and especially if you really want to support your client to kind of argue against another client that his frequency plan doesn't work. So remember, Jay, they used to have what's known as depth of coverage. Okay, and we came up with a new thing called depth of coverage. So we showed these holes in all these things. People like, what the heck? So for that, we needed a software program, which Neera literally wrote.
And I know Neera developed all of that.
She wrote that software program literally overnight. to automate these carry contours and interference calculations.
And also interference between multiple cells. It was just not interference between two cells.
Yeah,
because
just
of the
everybody's
reads.
working with everybody else.
And it all looks so pretty on paper, with the little, here's my system with all of my cells laid out, and of course, it.
But the key thing we discovered as soon as we came here, because it was a beauty contest, so everybody's dressing up their bride with all kind of beautiful clothes and saying, my bride is prettier than yours. And literally this thing was, I don't know what word Tommy G used, like whatever you call it, a monster. People had like graphic scanning had a 2,000-page marketing study that each market is unique and we had designed it. Okay, well, whatever they did, it was all kind of show and games going on. So we come in here and we say, okay, we had two trends of clients. One, we had people who said, well, we need to be sensible. We need to file in the markets. We have local presence. FCC will give us a benefit. It should be based on a business plan which is sustainable. These were the kind of people like Craig Farrell and Jan Combe,
And
Roger Lindquist and all.
McCaw.
Yeah, McCaw. And then there were other people who were saying FCC is not the smartest organization. They go by a simple thing. What's the biggest and
the largest?
And the largest. Okay.
Well, and didn't graphic scanning file in all 30 markets?
And they filed in all 30 markets.
They said it doesn't matter whether you have a local presence or not. This is a law of numbers.
In fact, they filed in 90 markets. That's the second, third round too. Yeah. So here we come in and we say, well, we have two sets of clients. We're going to have to if we're going to have to support them, the guys who did smaller markets, we're going to have to really support them against the larger guys. And somehow, the Jeff Beckett School of Thought, where you have the largest, best coverage, we have to support them too. So that's when the software was very helpful.
Yeah.
But let's just say that process, as somebody who was a victim of it to a certain extent, as a lawyer for clients in the space, it was random would have been just as good a process for determining the winners on the non-wireline side. Yeah. On the wireline side, I think we should point out that all the telephone companies settled the night before the filings were actually made. Yeah. So the day after the filings were made, that entire
right. AT&T had 23 markets and GT had 7,
well, it wasn't,
something like that in the top 30 or something.
It was the independents.
Oh,
it wasn't only GT.
Right. And
it was AT&T. They sat around and cut and divvied it up.
Yeah.
Even before the filings were made, they had it all worked out. Yeah. So the rest of us were scrambling over. I think the largest number of filings was 13, maybe. In LA.
In any market?
There were 13. There were other markets were only 2 or 3.
Boston had what, 2?
2.
Yeah. So it was completely random.
Yeah.
But the end of the story is that was essentially the last experiment the commission conducted on a wide scale of comparative hearings.
Right. Oh yeah. That was.
So
we should have Jay tell the story of cell number 24.
Yes, I know. I love that story, Jay.
Well, I mean, there's an interesting story here. We were sharing engineering with Arlene's company, ICS. CompuCount. Yeah. So we were sharing we had the common engineering, so we were paying, and we had different marketing studies. And during the application process, MCI approached our company to partner with us, and they wanted too much, we declined. So MCI went to ICS, the Arlene's company, and the MCI joined them. Then we heard
this
from...
This is LA you're talking about.
It's the LA market, yeah.
And then Arlene called us and said, they're going to go their separate way. They're joining MCI. Mm-hmm. So now we had the same engineering going in.
Right.
At the
FCC. Exactly the same map,
exactly,
the same frequency plans,
done
everything.
by CompuCon, same engineering. So that's where the thought came to me, the day before the filing night, that I need to differentiate. Because, Tommy, what you said, the FCC were looking for something to differentiate, which they can put their hat on, hang their hat on. So that's how I created the cell number 24 in the middle of the night. And it was about midnight And we need the access to the tower entire site, and the FCC required that you need the letter from the
Right, you had to
owner.
you had to assure the FCC that you had the promise of using that
Promise to
cell
use
site.
it. So
Yeah, so site
our
availability.
attorney, Arthur Blueston, he called his client in that area in Los Angeles called Palos Verdes, where there was a small gap. He said, Bob, you have a tower there. We need the access to here. We'll give you some chunk of 1% of the application.
Wow, 1% of LA. Yeah.
And so we brought him in the arrangement, and we got the letter from him at midnight. And then I changed the engineering, added the cell, had to do a lot of other stuff, frequency plan. So I got it done about 10 o'clock in the morning of the filing. Then you remember those huge maps, and you had to get those reproduced. And
5 copies? You had to have 5 copies, was it, Tom?
5 copies.
5
And
copies.
there's one place, that was doing maps for basically everybody. It was 17th and K Street,
Yeah.
about 5 blocks from Blueston's office. So at about 10 o'clock in the morning, I ran over there, and I need the 5 copies by, but that was about half an hour before the filing time. So he didn't want to do it. I can't do it. He said, no, you have to do it. So I convinced him to do it. So then I left Blueston's office to go pick up the copies. It was probably, we had about 30 minutes left to the filing. So I come out, it's raining. And so I waited a few minutes for the taxi, but then I said, okay, run. So I ran 5 blocks, and by the time I got there, I think they were closing the door. So I asked you to please open it, I need those maps. So we were able to file right at time, right at the last second.
Yeah.
And
And the FCC was very particular about that.
There was no such thing as almost on time.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, boom, 5 o'clock or 5, whatever the deadline was. That was
So
it.
small world is that Liz and I worked together. Liz was working with me on our applications that we were filing. And I don't know whether you remember, but the ones you're making fun of, the two language
Miami
ones.
application.
Bilingual.
I had bilingual. Because we had the only bilingual applicant. I want to make sure it was like right in front of their face. But I also wanted the application to be the easiest to work with for the staff. So I said we need to have a binder and punch hole paper
With the
and
map
I want
of the markets
yes, but I also
on
want it,
up on every
I know,
page
but
on
I
the
also
corners.
want it reinforced because if they use it a lot, it'll tear out. So I got special reinforced
Mylar reinforced.
paper, which the night we were rushing to try to get it all filed, the Xerox machine, of which we had 2, because I said one isn't enough, we have to have 2, we have to have a backup. Both machines jammed up
Kept
because
jamming.
they heated up the strip
Yeah,
of paper
I
on
forgot about that.
and they wouldn't go through the machine.
So what did you do?
Oh, you don't even want to know. And my wife, who wasn't in the firm at all, was there
Poor Bill,
helping us.
yeah.
And my 3-year-old son was in a stroller up against the wall in the office as we were getting these things out. It was absolute hell.
Chaos. And then one of the attorneys, Lou Gurman, had come down with the flu or something.
We
And
were
so-
done, and we were having
We were
a little
done.
drink
Yeah.
at like 2 in the morning, and somebody came in and said, "Mr. Gurman's applications aren't done."
Yeah.
We said, "What?"
And Morgan was like, okay, everybody. Back in the
put
salt
that,
mine.
Put that champagne down.
Yeah.
We're going to
Yeah.
get his applications
So,
done.
That's
So,
right.
So let me add a little insight to what Jay said, a little background, and then we're going to fast forward. And I'm going to mention this as one of the authors of the random aspect we had at the commission. So we're over at the commission, and there's hundreds of lawyers outside trying to find ways to perfect their applications.
Yeah.
And in mobile services, there were 7 of us. That was it.
Wow.
So it was. We had them outnumbered, we used to say, but I'm not sure that was really the case. So on the issue of qualifications, what are we going to look for in this comparative hearing? Because the commission got a good bit of criticism for being vague, and they were vague, and I was vague. We decided we didn't want to give practitioners an opportunity to boast about how they're going to promote the public good. We didn't need things based upon very subjective marketing analysis and whatnot. And when you chop out all the ones that don't fit, you were left with big is better, period. But the outside, we couldn't be that clear with the outside, so they didn't know what the heck was going on.
We didn't know that getting the applications ready.
Till after everything was filed. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Hide the ball.
Yeah.
Well, hide it a little bit. So anyway, I was working with Jay with some other markets. Houston was one of them that you and I worked on with him. But I followed the LA proceeding closely. And that was the only proceeding in the top 30 where one party prevailed, and then upon appeal, it didn't prevail. And the reason it didn't prevail, and it bolted Jay's client, our client, up to the first position, was because we had the 24th cell.
That's right.
And when you're negotiating with another entity that's already won the market, you're in a tough position. But Mr. Palmer had faith in the analysis that big is better, held tight, and won the whole tamale.
But you guys compromised that in the end. You didn't go to the last fight, right? Houston was finally partnership came
Yeah.
together.
Actually, we did not partner with the MCI.
But
we
Los
partnered
Angeles.
with the other
Carrier,
companies, for example, Lynn Broadcasting.
Yeah.
And we also brought in the local RCCs as a consortium in our group.
Yeah. And how many of the top 30 markets do you all remember actually went through comparative hearings? And how many settled out?
No, I think
Chicago.
I think
Most of them did
I
the
think
comparative
most
hearings.
went through the comparative hearing.
Yeah.
They've been for the comparative hearing, but only I think one or two of them went in front of the administrative law judge.
Yeah.
And the most classical case was Chicago. Arthur Blueston versus who was another law firm, I'm not sure, where they had basically graphic scanning backed off, saying, because they remember they had the biggest marketing study saying each market is unique, and all our data analysis, actually they didn't really use the marketing study for design, they simply used a formula, which is same for every market.
Yeah.
And that got discovered. And
I should add, the applicants who won in competitive hearing at the FCC, they not necessarily maintained the whole license because there was an appeal process. For example, we had the appeal in LA and Houston.
But you won the appeal, didn't you?
Well, we ended up giving some chunk to, in Houston, for example, to Lynn Broadcasting.
Yeah.
And same thing in LA too.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to go through the appeal process, and we gave them a small portion. Ultimately, there was settlement.
Yeah, I know it sort of winnowed down the number of competing applicants so it made it easier for the FCC to say, okay, this one, Houston, Cellular, whatever it ended up being called, telephone company. But how many applications were? I mean, I think in the round one for the non-wire lines, there were something like 300 applications.
It ranged from, I think it was 13 was the high.
But I mean, the total was
So say 10, maybe 300.
Yeah, 300.
Average of 8.
And
maybe
then
700.
after that, for round 2 and 3, it just went.
Well, I think
Actually, you're absolutely correct. For round 2, it almost doubled, and for round 3, it increased a lot. And for round 1, we had 190 applications.
Oh, that was it. Okay, I'm sorry. 190. Yeah. Wow.
So the
Wow.
am I remembering that we filed round 2 thinking it was comparative, and the commission changed it after the filing?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So it turned into like that was a complete waste. All you had to do is be in,
Right,
and you're as good as anybody else.
Yeah.
they couldn't have handled it. That's just,
It was-
Oh no, it
impossible.
would never. I mean, it
Having
would have
gone
taken
through
forever.
one of ours went all the way through the administrative law judge, and it was like a nightmare, a complete nightmare.
Also, if I may, Liz, when it switched from comparative to lotteries, before it switched, the commission had already said on a going forward basis, we're going to use lotteries. So the climate had changed even people that said, hey, we got a great round 2 application, understood the handwriting on the wall, that it was going to go lottery, and let's just settle and
Get it
move
over
on.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah. This also happened to my recollection. The people who got the ticket for the lottery, before even went to the lottery, they sold out the ticket to somebody.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I remember that.
Well, I remember the round 1 applications, and again, it was the 5 copies of the application, which was usually 2 binders. I'm thinking, Morgan, of some of those lovely applications. So that's 10 binders, and these are the thick binders, and then 5 copies of the 2 or 3 volume direct case. So every filing was, this tall, and the FCC was overwhelmed with paper. I mean, they were lining the hallways. You all remember? They had them stacked boxes and.
Vividly. Vividly, I remember.
Yeah. And then some of the shelves collapsed someplace. Yeah. So.
Underestimation.
That's right.
That's
yeah.
what it was.
So I think one thing I can say about round 1 is that actually it's a great experiment. An experiment in the sense, and the other countries learned from that. For example, in Germany in 1988, when there were 2 licenses, just like one for telephone company, but non-telephone company was Mannesmann Mobilfunk and BMW. So there were only 1 license for the whole country.
Yeah.
So now if you take whole of US and you say, well, okay, here there whomsoever wants to come in, there's 1 nationwide license. Maybe FCC and the federal government can handle it. But when you have so many licenses for so many MSAs and SMSAs, the amount of entropy in a system is so much that just the system, no matter how smart the FCC is, they just can't handle that many applications. And so if in the future they want to have a beauty contest, you better have only 1 license for the whole country, and that's not America.
Well, then if you're going to have a beauty contest, no offense, it'd be nice to define beauty before we have to file it.
That's no fun. All right.
That's right.
But I'm going to defend the commission a little bit. The simple fact of the matter is they got it right with a couple carriers. They had to move quickly, but they weren't going to bite on 1 carrier per market. Just weren't going to accept that.
We should point out that they only had 40 megahertz that they were going to make available initially.
Correct.
And so they said 20 is the minimum necessary for a viable business. So therefore, we can only have 2 per market.
Yeah. Right.
It was a limitation of how much spectrum they
So
had.
that was the right decision.
Yeah.
So they made you make a lot of right decisions, and nobody gives you credit. They kind
We're
of take
giving
it
you
for
credit
granted.
right now. You're just remembering our criticism from earlier.
It wasn't me that made these decisions. But I'll tell you one thing the commission did that I thought was good. Early on, they made a decision. If anybody has questions prior to the filings, prior to one of the reports coming out also, all the questions get funneled to 1 staff guy, so that Morgan can't go and ask Joe Blow something and then Jay asked somebody else something and come away with different answers.
And you were that person.
Unfortunately, I was that person.
Yeah. So.
Well, no, we were not criticizing FCC. We're just saying it's simply not possible to have hundreds of application people with beauty contests. Number of combinations is so large to compare these people. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I can remember, we're talking about, do you file minimum coverage so that you're not spending too much money, and so you look like you're thrifty, or do you file maximum coverage, looking like you don't want to leave a single blade of grass not covered? And that would be the debate, because the commission was hiding the ball and not telling you what the comparative criteria were going to be. So I got my clients for my applications, I said, bigger is better.
More population.
Gotta cover lots of cell sites. I want them to always say, well, that one has the most cell sites. And then I got pushback from my clients saying, yes, but that makes the application more expensive for you to prepare. So we're worried that you just want to be paid more for filing a bigger application. So I mean, This is the life
yeah.
that you go through
Yeah.
in a process like that. I'm all for the FCC.
Yeah.
I always say the story of my life is how great the FCC has been. So,
There you go. There you
But
since we're filming this.
You know, it was for law firms a huge undertaking, but also a very lucrative one, shall we say? You
Yeah,
know.
but I also want to say I got in on round one. I was inside the commission. Round 2 and 3, I was outside, and it was lucrative, but it was pressure packed.
Oh, yeah.
It was just, you could cut it with a knife, because if you messed up, you were going to pay. So
Well, we were a small firm, but we also had an engineering department, which is unusual in those days. So we did both the legal and the engineering for our applications. And when it was all over, the aftermath of June 7th, it had transformed
Yeah.
the law firm. But we had also worked the most ridiculous hours, traveling around the country night and day, weekends and everything to get these things done.
Well, I remember I got sent to Indianapolis to get cell sites, to site authorization letters, and going around to, farms and saying, hi, we've spoken and I just need you to sign here. So it was a vast undertaking for the clients.
I'll tell you my heartbreaking story. We filed, as Liz remembers, for 3 different markets in the top 30 for a telephone company.
Yeah.
And the day after, June 7th, that night, they called us up and said, we settled yesterday, so it doesn't matter.
And you said, the bill will be there tomorrow.
They were fantastic.
Yeah, they were good. They were
This was
great.
the client, this is the only time in my practice that I had a client like this who said, we know we're doing this late, and so if you send us a bill, we will pay it.
Yeah. Yep.
And they did.
great.
But it was a little disheartening that they had settled even before we filed.
Yeah.
Well, so so in this kind of a situation, we came in when just in the beginning of the whole thing, but we didn't prepare the application, and it turns out Gencom applied in 5 markets in Atlanta, San Diego, Phoenix, and 2 other markets. I don't remember. And
San Diego, San
Yeah.
Jose? No,
Sa-
did they do San Francisco and San Jose?
Dallas, right?
And
Dallas,
Dallas,
yeah.
And these guys were like, well, the business plan has to hang together, so they had the smallest minimum required coverage. And I'm looking at it and I was like, what do we do here with these guys? So everybody had put frequency plan, but nobody has figured out the frequency plans are correct or not correct because nobody had tools to analyze interference. So we came up with this idea that this coverage is great, but it's meaningless because the frequencies will all interfere and you have no coverage. So
When I changed the map, I had to do the frequency plan. I was no expert in frequency plan. So I did something. Nobody questioned it.
nobody will question you.
Ron Janier was the only two that knew it didn't work.
So it turns out in that case, then Gencom could settle with other people before going to the final hearings.
Yeah.
But they were going to lose.
Well,
Because coverage became, hey, guess
Yeah,
what? Surprise!
but
coverage
Coverage
is
and population.
but
I
they-
think population was more than coverage. The
But they-
criteria.
covered
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 population. But they had an argument for that your application is defective. So please let me work with you.
Yeah. Well, and as I recall, even though Graphic filed in all the top 30 markets, people were reluctant to settle with Graphic because they were there were proceedings against one of the principals of Graphic for warehousing paging frequencies or something that hadn't been resolved.
in the legal business, we call it fraud.
Okay.
Well, that was unrelated.
I was trying to be gentle on that
but
one.
that was unrelated.
Well,
what really got them was the Chicago hearing where
Yeah.
Arthur Blueston put them on a stand.
Oh, yeah.
And
picked them
have-
apart.
Yeah, basically, having to admit this on the stage that the marketing study was just a for show and tell. They really didn't use that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, after that, everybody said, we
After
don't
that-
need to settle with them.
Raj, the word out in the industry was Dr. Raj Singh destroyed graphic scanning.
No.
There was a statement Raj made, became so popular. Can you talk about the statement?
Oh, yeah.
It was basically, the whole thing was that for this kind of a analysis to be accurate, its chance is 1 in 13 trillion.
13. Yeah. Oh, that
Well,
did it.
Well, but there was the key thing is really, it was particularly not in engineering, because we have experiments in engineering all the time. But social experiments are not very common because they take a long time and nobody wants to suffer policy adverse consequences. It's like we could say, well, you could go loot a store and you go free. We can have that experiment, but probably not for too long. In this case, it really truly was an experiment. And I think the rest of the world learned from it. Rest of the world decided we're not going to have each area have a license.
Yeah.
We're going to have a nationwide license, or we're going to have 2 licenses.
Yeah.
Because as they came along. So I think round 1 was the most beautiful experiment.
Well, and the FCC learned from it, obviously, because a nationwide license wasn't going to be in the cards at that point. But they pretty much had said, okay, we got to come up with another approach to handle this.
That's when we come
moving to lotteries, but yeah.
And when the lotteries came, then you had all these. So for Neera and I, we're looking at this, and I'm a university professor. She's a chemical engineer turned wireless engineer. She's writing all this software and all that, and we're saying like, boy, these guys have tens of thousands of applications. Remember there were application mills. People were making copies. We said that's not where the puck is going. Puck is going where they're going to be real design. Once these people get licenses, they're going to have to do something.
Right.
Yeah, they got to build them.
Build them. And that's the transition we took at that time.
Yeah.
So we didn't get into the licensed mill business other than one, which was, remember Bob Blow?
Yeah.
Bob Lowe, Memphis.
Yeah.
From Memphis.
Memphis. He came to me and said there was some applications for paging, two-way paging license. And he said to me, I really want you to prepare this application. And I said, Bob, we don't do this. He said, no, you have to do. So he takes me for dinner and he says, here is a match. He said, I want 500 copies of an application. And I said, 500? But I just said, you want only one application? He said, I'll make 500 copies. So I said, okay. So he takes a match box and writes on the back of it, $270,000, signs Bob Blow. And he said, I'll give you, what's 5-page application, 10-page application? I gave it to Bob. Guess what happens? He ends up winning the lottery. Because the arrangement was in 500, the person who wins gets 51% and all the losers share 49%. Yeah. Bob Blow got that license.
Yeah. I hope you still have that matchbox.
No, but it's
wow, yeah.
You remember him, right? He was a character.
I do,
He was a character.
He was a character. I knew him real well.
But I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah, me either. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So round one was a great experiment.
Yeah.
We all learned from it.
Yeah.
Well, and Neera and I probably won't be in business if it wasn't round one.
Yeah. Well, and then Morgan, you moved on to a new adventure with creating a competitor to Cellular through waivers. Or how did that work?
The exact same docket that gave birth to Cellular also gave birth to a new concept of service for the private radio users. And to make a long story short, by the time Cellular started really cranking up, that opportunity had developed to the point where it was possible to consider what would now be called a rolling up a lot of those licenses. Those businesses were being sold at essentially 10% of the value per megahertz of spectrum that Cellular was. So I went to some folks and we decided that you could raise capital to acquire these businesses and then go to the FCC and say, you know, you wanted more competition
Right.
for cellular, but you didn't have enough spectrum. How about if you let us use this different spectrum to compete with cellular? And the cellular industry, as you can imagine, thought it was a fantastic idea. And they sent me a lot of letters of congratulations and appreciation. I think at one point we counted there were like 200 lawyers that were involved in trying to stop us. But surprisingly, in 10 months from the application, the petition at the FCC to getting it granted, is amazing that the FCC said, you know, at the end of the day, competition is always a benefit. And if you can use spectrum more efficiently, and we had, as we were germinating this whole thing, one of my partners said, the really incredible thing to do would be to go and get Rajan Neera Singh to help do the engineering for us. And I said, are you kidding? They won't even answer the phone for us because we're the enemy of cellular. But I was wrong, thankfully. And that started a incredibly fruitful relationship in which we had the best possible engineering expertise supporting everything we did, not just the filing, but the building.
Well, as Raj said, the FCC had learned from a lot of that experience. And even though, you know, I was in the sort of cellular carrier world, and as you're right, everybody was just thrilled with what you were doing, Morgan, that the FCC realized, you know, yeah, if we had underestimated what the demand for this stuff was going to be. It's been very popular. We got to have more competition.
Morgan, that reminds me, there was a spectrum in 2.5 gig. There was I can't recall the name of that spectrum, which was for television. And people took your lesson from you.
Clearwire.
Oh my God, Clearwire.
Clearwire, and then MCI got involved. They went and bought that spectrum with the anticipation that they can roll over to cellular.
Yep.
Which is now T-Mo's main bread and butter spectrum.
That spectrum is.
T-Mobile.
Yeah.
So Morgan created a second idea after the first licensing, and now everybody's riding on
But here's the thing, though. If I were half as smart as I ought to be, I would have switched out of representing people who wanted cellular licenses and owning cellular licenses as opposed to, I did it the hard way. Yeah, exactly. I did it the hard way.
Oh, Raj, you were involved in the lottery process, right? In the mini market?
No.
We never.
You did international marketing.
International.
Yeah, you did international
No,
marketing.
not the lottery. We did get a competitive hearing in Mexico, got a license. Then we had a competitive hearing in India, Bombay First Circle. We got a license there. Then Telcel, Portugal, Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, and then we got. Then we tried some other things in Netherlands where we lost it to another company. We were together with Bell South there, didn't win that. We tried in many different markets, but I think the experiment was done here. Well, actually, so like in India, they only had, whole of India initially, they only had 4 metro circles. So they could handle the competitive hearing because there were only 4 circles and there were only like 4 applications. So you have a total of 16 applications, not thousands of.
Although, a question for you: if the U.S. had tried a national license, would the MCCAs and the GenComs and would they would have had trouble filing for? I mean, I think that would have been more of a challenge.
I think that we have, this is a highly controversial topic, what Lina Khan is doing at the our anti-competitive or policies and breaking up larger companies. I really do believe that having now eventually they all consolidate together and have larger companies like we have happened. But I really do believe that the cellular business would not be as vibrant as it is today if we did not have a second competitor in each market, and we didn't have lots of competitors who are trying to experiment all kinds of ideas and things. I mean, we are the craziest people in first round. Look at Brian McTernan from Chicago. You look at Al Adams, Jerry Adams, Paul Tobin. I mean, you have Los Angeles was the craziest person. You had a guy from Lynn and a guy from Bob Cecil, and who
Bob
was
Cecil,
Bob
and,
Cecil,
and
yeah.
I mean, you have these people who trying all kinds of marketing experiments, systems experiments, and then you get some more creative people like Morgan and Chris Rogers, and I think that's the beauty of this country.
Yeah, how about, very tough negotiator with Lynn, Carl Aaron. Anybody remembers Carl Aaron?
Yeah.
He was a very tough negotiator with the companies and also with the vendors.
Yeah.
I partnered with him. He was involved in LA as well as Houston.
And then Craig McCaw came.
Yeah, and
from-
McCaw, I think, also, in that idea of a national system, they started with, a handful of systems. I think we filed like 9 applications for them, and they got a chunk of those, and then just began building out the national system once they had, some experience under their belts.
Yeah, let's not forget the contribution of Raj and Neera. See, when Cellular started, it was very difficult to roam. They very difficult to, if you roam, then the charges and the settlement charges between different carriers. Raj and Neera came up with the idea of
Apex, yeah.
Apex.
Clearinghouse.
Yeah, you all were really instrumental. And you covered the
That
globe
was-
here with
yeah.
engineering and
But
the roaming business
Truth be
part.
told, what happened is we were competing with a couple of other guys trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And the CTIA meeting was there. And Paul Tobin, Al Adams, Jerry Adams, and Los Angeles people. Jay. These guys went to CTI and said, no, we already have a solution, it works 100%. Now, it turns out they didn't know it works 100%. It was working like 75, 80%.
Yeah.
Okay? But from 0 to 75% is still a long way, right?
Yeah.
So that's how FX kind of became.
I remember that when, Raj was a professor and did not have presence in Washington. It really was not established as a LCC. So Raj and I talked one night, and I convinced you should leave your academia job and go to DC.
Well, I said, what would I do about my salary?
He was making $14,000 a year.
That was big money.
That was-
too, right?
Yeah, I got him an office at Blueston's office. And then when he was starting this building company, you called me. He said, Jay, partner with me. And I didn't take your advice.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest mistakes in my life.
But look, it was an incredible, I mean, Tommy, you have been there from day one, Morgan. I mean, everybody, that's the beauty of this country, where we do kind of crazy things, and they all eventually blossom into some great.
And then everybody becomes friends at the end. Who knew?
Well, speaking of the end, I think we're going to
We're at the
have
end.
to stop this session for now, but thank you all so much.